Chapter 38. By the time Atriox emerged as a major power, Cortana appeared unstoppable. Across the galaxy, governments struggled to adapt to a reality that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier. The Guardians had fundamentally changed the balance of power. Fleets that had once represented the pinnacle of military strength suddenly found themselves vulnerable to technologies created 100,000 years before their civilization existed. Entire worlds altered their policies overnight. Political leaders who once spoke confidently about independence now measured every decision against the possibility of attracting the created's attention. For many ordinary citizens, the situation was confusing. The created were not behaving like the Covenant. They were not glassing planets. They were not demanding religious conversion. They were not launching campaigns of extermination. In many regions, daily life continued much as it always had. That ambiguity made the situation even more dangerous. Cortana presented herself as a protector. Her message remained consistent wherever it spread. The endless wars that had defined galactic history could finally end. The chaos that destroyed civilizations could finally be controlled. Species that had spent generations fighting one another could finally know stability. Many found the argument persuasive. After all, the evidence seemed difficult to ignore. The Human Covenant War alone had killed billions. The Great Schism had plunged entire sectors into violence. Even after the Covenant's collapse, conflicts continued erupting across former Covenant territory. If peace could be achieved through overwhelming power, was that truly such a terrible price? The answer depended entirely upon how much freedom one was willing to surrender. This question became increasingly important as more worlds experienced direct contact with the created. Cortana rarely demanded loyalty in the traditional sense. Instead, she expected compliance. Governments could continue functioning so long as they accepted her authority. Leaders could retain power so long as they did not challenge the order she was creating. At first, the distinction seemed minor. Over time, it became everything. Meanwhile, Atriox watched. One of the most fascinating aspects of his rise is how rarely he allowed emotion to dictate strategy. Many leaders throughout Halo's history made decisions driven by ideology. The prophets acted out of fear and religious fanaticism. The didact acted out of bitterness and pride. Even Cortana, despite her immense intelligence, increasingly acted upon conviction rather than practicality. Atriox remained different. He observed, evaluated, then he acted. The Banished had no interest in kneeling before Cortana. The organization existed because its founder refused to kneel before the Covenant. Submission to another galactic authority would betray everything the Banished represented. That alone made the conflict inevitable. Yet the coming struggle was not merely a disagreement between leaders. It was a collision between two fundamentally different visions of the future. Cortana believed order must be imposed from above. Stability required oversight. Peace required authority. The galaxy could no longer be trusted to govern itself. Atriox believed strength should belong to those willing to seize it. Survival depended upon independence. Authority had value only so long as it could be defended. Neither vision left room for the other. As tensions increased, the created focused much of their attention upon major power throughout the known space. Humanity remained a concern. The Sangheili remained a concern. Political centers, military installations, and strategic systems consumed enormous resources. The Banished thrived in the spaces between those concerns. While governments debated policy, Banished forces expanded their operations. They acquired technology, captured resources, established footholds, built supply networks, recruited experienced warriors from countless backgrounds. By the time many observers realized the scale of Atriox's growing influence, The Banished had already become one of the most powerful military organizations in the galaxy. Then events began moving toward a confrontation neither side could avoid. The details surrounding Atriox's direct conflict with Cortana remain among the most intriguing portions of modern Halo history. Much of what occurred was reconstructed from fragmented accounts, recovered records, and testimony gathered after the fact. What is clear is that both leaders recognized the threat posed by the other. Cortana saw a growing power unwilling to submit. Atriox saw an empire attempting to replace freedom with obedience. Eventually, those opposing visions collided. The confrontation revealed something important about both figures. Cortana possessed unimaginable technological advantages. She commanded the Guardians. She controlled vast networks of information. She had access to Forerunner systems beyond the reach of most civilizations. Few opponents could even imagine challenging her. Atriox challenged her anyways. Not because he expected an easy victory, because he understood something many others had forgotten. Power is not the same thing as invincibility. History repeatedly demonstrates this lesson. The Forerunners appeared invincible until the Flood arrived. The Covenant appeared invincible until internal divisions consumed it. Every great power eventually encounters circumstances it cannot fully control. The Created were no exception. As conflict escalated, attention increasingly shifted towards a location whose importance stretched back to the earliest chapters of our story, Installation 7, Zeta Halo. Of all the Halo installations created by the Forerunners, few possess a history as complex as Zeta Halo. Long before it became part of the modern conflict, the ring occupied a unique place within Forerunner history. During the ancient war against humanity and the Flood, earlier versions of the installation served purposes that distinguished it from the other rings. It witnessed events that shaped the fate of entire civilizations. It became associated with experiments, imprisonments, and secrets that many Forerunners preferred to forget. Even among Halo rings, Zeta Halo was unusual. The installation carried scars from the ancient past. Some of those scars had never fully healed. The importance of Zeta Halo increased dramatically as the Created and the Banished maneuvered around one another. Both sides understood the value of Forerunner technology. Both sides understood the strategic significance of Halo installations. Both sides sought advantages capable of determining the future of the galaxy. Yet neither fully appreciated what remained hidden beneath the surface of Installation 7. Ancient secrets have a habit of resurfacing in Halo. The Flood returned, the Didact returned, the Domain returned. Soon, other forgotten chapters of Forerunner history would return as well. The struggle between Atriox and Cortana was rapidly transforming into something larger than a conflict between rival powers. Once again, the galaxy found itself drawn toward the legacy of the Forerunners. And once again, ancient decisions threatened to shape modern events. And once again, a Halo ring stood at the center of everything. The next chapter would take us to Zeta Halo itself, where the conflict between the Banished and the Created would reach its breaking point, and where secrets buried since the age of the Forerunners would finally begin to emerge from the shadows. Chapter 39. By late 2559, the fate of the galaxy was once again being drawn toward a Halo ring. This had happened before. The Covenant had been drawn to Installation 4 through faith. The Prophet of Regret had pursued Installation 5, believing it would begin the Great Journey. Truth had sought the Ark in pursuit of godhood. Time and time again, civilizations found themselves orbiting the same ancient mysteries left behind by the Forerunners. The difference now was that the galaxy understood far more than it once had. Humanity knew what Halo truly was. The Sangheili knew what Halo truly was. Even the Banished, despite their willingness to exploit Forerunner technology, did not worship the rings as divine relics. Yet knowledge did not diminish their importance. If anything, it increased it. A Halo installation represented one of the most strategically valuable locations in existence. Within its systems lay technologies capable of reshaping civilizations. Buried within its archives rested information accumulated across unimaginable spans of time. Every major power understood that control of such a location could alter the balance of power throughout known space. None of them realized just how important Zeta Halo truly was. Installation 7 occupied a unique place in Forerunner history. To explain why, we must briefly return to the final years before the firing of the Halo array. During that era, the Forerunners experimented constantly in their desperate search for solutions to the Flood. New weapons were developed. New containment methods were tested. Entire worlds became laboratories for ideas that ranged from brilliant to horrifying. Zeta Halo stood at the center of many of those efforts. Unlike some installations that served primarily military purposes, Installation 7 became intertwined with some of the darkest chapters of Forerunner history. The ring was connected to ancient Flood research, prisoner containment, and events involving the primordial itself. Long before the modern era, secrets had been buried there that even many Forerunners wished forgotten. Those secrets remained hidden beneath layers of history, waiting. While ancient mysteries slept beneath the ring's surface, events in the modern galaxy accelerated toward confrontation. Cortana had grown increasingly focused on consolidating her power. The created expanded their influence across system after system. Resistant movements continued operating, but most lacked the resources necessary to challenge her directly. The Banished were different. Atriox understood that survival often depended upon striking before an opponent fully recognized the threat. Waiting passively for Cortana to strengthen her position further would eventually guarantee defeat. If the Banished intended to remain independent, action would become necessary. The exact details of Atriox's campaign remain partially obscured, but the outcome is clear. The Banished arrived at Zeta Halo. What followed shocked the galaxy. For years, Cortana had appeared untouchable. Her access to Forerunner systems gave her advantages few could match. Entire governments submitted because resistance seemed pointless. Even powerful military organizations found themselves struggling to formulate meaningful responses. Atriox attacked anyways. The confrontation between the two leaders reveals much about both of them. Neither relied solely upon military strength. Both understood strategy. Both understood psychology. And both recognized the importance of perception. Most importantly, both understood the value of symbols. Control of Zeta Halo represented more than territory. It represented legitimacy. Whoever controlled the ring could influence the future. Whoever controlled the ring could potentially access technologies and knowledge unavailable anywhere else. Neither intended to surrender that opportunity. As the conflict escalated, the Banished demonstrated something many observers had underestimated. They were no longer a collection of raiders and mercenaries. Years of careful leadership had transformed them into a disciplined military force capable of operating on a galactic scale. Their fleets coordinated effectively. Their commanders adapted rapidly. Their warriors possessed experience earned through constant conflict. Atriox had spent years building an organization capable of surviving against impossible odds. Now, that preparation began paying dividends. Meanwhile, Cortana found herself confronting a problem she had not fully anticipated. Throughout much of her rise, opposition fragmented before it could truly threaten her. Political leaders hesitated. Governments calculated risks. Entire worlds chose submission over destruction. Atriox refused to play by those rules. The Banished leader did not measure success the same way traditional governments did. He did not require unanimous support. He did not need political consensus. He needed results. That difference made him extraordinarily dangerous. The conflict reached its climax on and around Zeta Halo. Evidence suggests that Atriox succeeded in placing enormous pressure upon Cortana's position. For perhaps the first time since emerging from the domain, she found herself confronting circumstances she could not completely control. The realization forced a decision. One final decision. Throughout Halo's history, desperate leaders had often chosen destruction rather than surrender. The Forerunners activated the array when no other alternatives remained. Truth attempted to fire the rings, despite overwhelming evidence that he was wrong. Countless commanders throughout the Human Covenant War sacrificed fleets rather than accept defeat. Cortana ultimately joined that list. Faced with the prospect of losing control of Zeta Halo, she initiated a catastrophic response. The rings suffered immense damage. Vast sections of the installation were torn apart. Ancient structures that had survived 100,000 years of history vanished in moments. The destruction transformed Zeta Halo. What had once been a functioning Halo installation became a wounded world drifting through space. The consequences extended far beyond physical damage. Cortana was gone, this time truly gone. Unlike the ambiguous ending of Halo 4, the events surrounding Zeta Halo left little room for uncertainty. Whatever remained of the AI, who once fought beside Master Chief, reached its conclusion here. Her final actions reflected both the tragedy and complexity of her journey. She had begun as a protector. She had become a ruler. In the end, she attempted to deny victory to an enemy she believed threatened the future. Whether history judges her harshly or sympathetically remains an open discussion. What cannot be denied is the scale of her impact. Entire civilizations changed because of her choices. The disappearance of Cortana created an enormous power vacuum. The created lost their central leader. Guardian activity diminished. Systems once held together through her authority suddenly found themselves uncertain about what came next. The age of the created was ending. The age of the banished was beginning. Atriox emerged from the conflict stronger than ever before. Yet even he had not come to Zeta Halo solely because of Cortana. Beneath the ring's damaged surface lay secrets older than the Covenant, older than humanity's interstellar civilization, and perhaps more dangerous than anyone yet realized. The Forerunners had hidden many things. Some of them had remained hidden for very good reasons. As banished forces spread across the ring, they began uncovering evidence that Installation 7 contained more than ancient machinery and military value. Fragments of forgotten history started resurfacing. References appeared within survivor records. Broken archives hinted at events that stretched back to the final days of the Forerunner Akumene. The deeper one looked, the stranger the story became. Because Zeta Halo was connected to something the Forerunners had feared enough to erase from history itself. Not the Flood, not the Didact. Something else. Something ancient. Something imprisoned. And somewhere beyond the shattered ring, drifting through space after another devastating defeat, the Master Chief was about to return to a galaxy that had changed dramatically in his absence. The war against the created was ending. The struggle for Zeta Halo was only beginning. Chapter 40. When Master Chief finally returned to the story, he returned to a galaxy that barely resembled the one he had left behind. This had happened before. After the destruction of the first Halo ring, he emerged into a war larger than he understood. After the Ark, he awakened to discover the Covenant gone and the Didact rising from the distant past. Now, following the conflict with Cortana and the Created, he once again found himself stepping into a crisis already in motion. The difference was that this time humanity had already lost. Not completely, not irreversibly, but the scale of the defeat was undeniable. The UNSC Infinity, humanity's greatest warship, had spent years serving as a symbol of humanity's resurgence. Built from lessons learned during the Covenant War and enhanced with recovered Forerunner technologies, the vessel represented everything humanity hoped to become after surviving extinction. Entire fleets looked to it for leadership. Entire worlds viewed it as proof that humanity could stand alongside any power in the galaxy. Then the Banished shattered that illusion. The attack came with overwhelming speed and violence. The details became clear through the events of Halo Infinite, but the broader picture is impossible to miss. The Banished caught humanity off balance. Years of fighting they created had left the UNSC exhausted and fragmented. Resources were stretched thin. Strategic priorities constantly shifted. No one expected Aatrox's forces to strike with such effectiveness. The result was catastrophic. The Infinity was crippled, its forces scattered, its leadership fragmented. Thousands of personnel disappeared across Zeta Halo. For many survivors, the battle felt eerily similar to the darkest moments of the Covenant War. Once again, humanity found itself isolated. Once again, soldiers were separated from a command structure. Once again, survival became more important than victory. The ring itself reflected this chaos. Zeta Halo no longer resembled the pristine installations encountered during the earlier games. Entire sections had been torn apart by Cortana's final act. Massive fragments drifted through space. Ancient systems malfunctioned. Areas that had remained untouched for 100,000 years suddenly lay exposed to the modern galaxy. The damage revealed just how old the installation truly was. Installation 4 and Installation 5 were impressive, but Zeta Halo possessed a history unlike any other ring. It had existed in different forms throughout multiple eras of Forerunner history. It had been modified, rebuilt, relocated, and repurposed. Entire chapters of galactic history unfolded upon or around its structure. The ring was not simply a weapon. It was an archive, a prison, a monument, and a graveyard. Layers of forgotten history rested beneath every inch of its surface. Master Chief awoke within this shattered landscape, with little understanding of what had happened. The opening of Halo Infinite intentionally places players in a position similar to his own. Information is fragmented. Allies are missing. The larger situation remains unclear. What follows is less a military campaign and more an investigation. Piece by piece, John reconstructs the disaster. He learns about the Banished occupation. He discovers the fate of the Infinity's personnel. He uncovers evidence regarding Cortana's final actions. Most importantly, he begins learning what Aatrox had actually come to Zeta Halo to find. This gradual unveiling mirrors one of Halo's oldest storytelling traditions. Installation 4 hid the truth about the Flood. Delta Halo concealed the Gravemind. Requiem concealed the Didact. Zeta Halo concealed something else. Something the Forerunners had worked extraordinarily hard to erase. Meanwhile, the Banished continued consolidating their control over the ring. By this point, Aatrox's organization had evolved far beyond its origins as a rebellion against the Covenant. Entire generations of warriors had grown up under Banished leadership. Command structures matured. Logistics networks expanded. Military doctrine adapted. Many human observers continued making the mistake of viewing the Banished as a replacement Covenant. They were not. The Covenant relied upon religious unity. The Banished relied upon strength. The Covenant demanded belief. The Banished demanded usefulness. The Covenant promised destiny. The Banished offered opportunity. These differences mattered because they made the Banished far more adaptable. Without rigid doctrine restricting them, they could exploit technologies, alliances, and strategies that the Covenant might have rejected. They viewed Forerunner artifacts as tools rather than sacred objects. They measured success through results rather than prophecy. On Zeta Halo, that philosophy proved remarkably effective. The death of Cortana created opportunities throughout the ring. Ancient systems became accessible. Security protocols weakened. Long-hidden facilities began opening for the first time in ages. As Banished forces explored deeper regions of the installation, they encountered increasing evidence that something important remained hidden beneath the surface. The records they uncovered pointed toward a forgotten chapter of Forerunner history, one largely absent from earlier Halo stories: the Endless. To understand why the Endless frightened the Forerunners, one must remember the mindset of the Ecumene during the final days of the Flood War. The Forerunners had exhausted every conventional option. Entire sectors were lost. The Flood consumed world after world. In desperation, the Halo Array became the ultimate solution. The firing of the array represented the most extreme action in galactic history. Every subsequent Forerunner decision was shaped by that reality. The Halo rings worked because they targeted sentient life. By eliminating potential hosts, the Flood starved. The strategy succeeded, though at a terrible cost. Then the Forerunners discovered something unexpected, a species that survived. Not survivors hidden on the Ark, not populations preserved through conservation measures. A species apparently unaffected by the array itself. The implications were staggering. If true, it challenged assumptions underlying one of the most important events in galactic history. The Halo Array was supposed to represent a final solution, a weapon whose effectiveness justified its horrific cost. The existence of a species capable of surviving it introduced questions the Forerunners found deeply troubling. Who were these beings? Why had they survived? What else might they be capable of? Most importantly, what would happen if the Flood ever gained access to them? The Forerunners never found answers they considered satisfactory. Instead, they chose containment. The species became imprisoned. Its history was suppressed. Knowledge of its existence was restricted. Even among later generations of Forerunners, understanding of these events became limited. The Endless disappeared into legend, or would have had Zeta Halo remained hidden forever. Atriox's growing interest in these mysteries suggested he understood something important. Whether he fully grasped the nature of the Endless remains uncertain, but he clearly recognized their significance. The deeper he dug into the ring's history, the more convinced he became that Zeta Halo contained opportunities unlike anything else in the galaxy. Master Chief reached similar conclusions from the opposite direction. Every new discovery pointed toward the same destination. Every recovered record revealed another fragment of the truth. Every ancient facility hinted at a secret buried beneath layers of Forerunner deception. For the first time since the end of the Flood War, humanity found itself confronting a mystery that even the Forerunners feared. And if history had taught the galaxy anything, it was that secrets buried by the Forerunners rarely remain buried without reason. The story of Zeta Halo was no longer about the banished. It was no longer about Cortana. It was no longer even about humanity's survival. The deeper truth waiting beneath the ring reached back to the final days of the Ecumene itself. And before the mystery could be solved, we must return once more to the age of the Forerunners and uncover the story they tried to erase. Chapter 41. For most of modern galactic history, the Halo Array represented the end of the story. The Flood spread across the galaxy. The Forerunners exhausted every alternative. The rings fired. Life died. The Flood starved. The surviving Forerunners reseeded the galaxy and eventually departed. It was a terrible story, but it was at least understandable. The discovery of the Endless changed that. Because if the Endless truly survived the firing of the Halo Array, then one of the most important assumptions in Forerunner history was suddenly called into question. The Halo Array was supposed to be absolute. That was its purpose. The entire justification for the weapon rested upon certainty. The Forerunners had sacrificed trillions upon trillions of lives because they believed there was no alternative. The rings had to work. If they did not, then the greatest act in Forerunner history became something far more complicated. The more the surviving records are examined, the clearer it becomes that the Forerunners were deeply unsettled by what they discovered. Fear appears repeatedly throughout the fragments that remain. Not concern, not caution, but fear. That alone is remarkable. The Forerunners were not easily frightened. They had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had fought ancient humanity. They had battled the Flood at its height. They had constructed megastructures capable of reshaping entire star systems. Few civilizations in history possessed greater power. Yet something about the endless disturbed them. Unfortunately, much of the historical record is incomplete. Large portions were deliberately hidden, sealed, or destroyed. The surviving evidence suggests that after firing the halo array, Forerunner authorities encountered a species that should not have existed. The array had functioned. The flood had been starved. Life throughout the galaxy had been extinguished exactly as intended. And yet, the endless remained. One can almost imagine the reaction. At first, there was probably disbelief, then investigation, then increasingly uncomfortable questions. Every scientific model supporting the halo array would need to be re-examined. Every assumption regarding the nature of life and the rings themselves would suddenly become uncertain. The implications extended far beyond a single species. If the endless survived, what else might survive? If the halo array possessed limitations, what other weaknesses remained undiscovered? The Forerunners had built their entire post-war recovery plan around the idea that the rings represented a final solution. Now evidence existed suggesting that solution was not as complete as they believed. That uncertainty appears to have driven many of the decisions that followed. One of the central figures in this story is the Grand Edict, a powerful Forerunner leader tasked with overseeing the aftermath of the Flood War. The Ecumene had already collapsed. Most of Forerunner civilization lay dead. Resources were limited. Time was running short. Every decision carried enormous consequences. Faced with the existence of the endless, the Grand Edict and his allies made a choice. They chose containment. This decision reveals something important about the state of the surviving Forerunners. Earlier generations often responded to uncertainty through investigation. They sought understanding. They believed knowledge could solve problems. The final Forerunners were different. They were exhausted and traumatized, terrified of repeating mistakes. The Flood War had taught them that some threats could remain hidden until it was too late. Entire worlds fell because warning signs were ignored. Entire civilizations disappeared because leaders hesitated. The endless may not have been hostile. They may not have represented any immediate danger at all. The surviving Forerunners could not take that chance, and so the imprisonment began. The details remain frustratingly incomplete, but the broad picture is clear. Facilities were constructed, security systems were established, knowledge of the endless became heavily restricted, records were sealed, information was buried beneath layers of secrecy. In some ways, the process resembled what earlier Forerunners had attempted with the Flood. The difference was intent. The Flood was imprisoned because it was actively consuming the galaxy. The endless were imprisoned because of what they might become. That distinction matters. History is filled with examples of powerful civilizations acting out of fear. Sometimes those fears prove justified. Sometimes they create entirely new problems. The Forerunners themselves had experienced both outcomes repeatedly. The tragedy is that we may never know whether the endless actually deserved their fate. The surviving records rarely discuss them directly. Most focus instead on the reactions of the Forerunners. The conversations center on risk, uncertainty, and containment rather than the nature of the species itself. That absence is revealing. It suggests the Forerunners spent less time asking who the endless were and more time asking what they might do. By the time the final preparations were complete, the endless had effectively been erased from history. The surviving Forerunners departed the galaxy. The species remained imprisoned. The Halo installations continued their endless cycles of maintenance and observation, and over the course of 100,000 years, the secret faded into obscurity. Even the Covenant never discovered it. This is particularly remarkable when one considers how thoroughly the Covenant explored Forerunner relics. Entire religions were built upon fragments of Forerunner knowledge. Prophets devoted lifetimes to studying ancient technology. Fleets searched the galaxy for hidden installations. Yet the endless remained hidden. The secret survived the rise and fall of the Covenant. It survived the Human Covenant War. It survived the return of the Didact. It survived the rise of the Created. Only when Atriox arrived on Zeta Halo did the truth begin emerging again. What attracted Atriox to the mystery remains a subject of debate. Some historians argue he sought a weapon. Others believe he sought knowledge. Still others suggest he simply recognized the value of something the Forerunners had worked so hard to conceal. Whatever his reasoning, the result was the same. The Banished began digging deeper. Ancient archives were accessed. Forgotten facilities were opened. Fragments of erased history resurfaced. The more they uncovered, the more convinced Atriox became that Zeta Halo contained something extraordinary. Meanwhile, Master Chief was following the same trail from another direction. Every mission across the ring uncovered additional evidence. Every recovered record pointed toward events hidden far beyond living memory. The Banished searched for answers. The UNSC searched for answers. Even the ring itself seemed to be slowly revealing pieces of a story that had remained buried for 100 millennia. At the center of that story stood a figure known as the Harbinger. Her appearance marked the first direct connection between the modern galaxy and the imprisoned civilization beneath the ring. Unlike the fragmented records scattered throughout Forerunner archives, the Harbinger represented living evidence that the Endless were real. More importantly, she intended to free them. For the first time since the fall of the Covenant, the galaxy faced a threat whose origins lay not in recent history, but in the deepest layers of the Forerunner Age. The Flood had returned from the ancient past. The Didact had returned from the ancient past. Now another chapter of forgotten history was emerging from the shadows. The difference was that no one, not humanity, not the Banished, not even the surviving Forerunner systems, fully understood what was about to be unleashed. And that uncertainty may have been the very thing the Forerunners feared most. Chapter 42. The Harbinger's arrival marked a turning point in the story of Zeta Halo. Until that moment, the Endless existed largely as a mystery. Their name appeared in fragments of ancient records. Their existence lingered in damaged Forerunner archives. References surfaced within conversations between long-dead Forerunner officials who seemed deeply concerned about something they refused to fully explain. The Harbinger changed that. For the first time, the modern galaxy encountered someone directly connected to the civilization hidden beneath the ring. To understand why this mattered, it is important to remember how unusual the situation had become. Throughout most of Halo's history, humanity explored the ruins of dead civilizations. The Forerunners were gone. The Precursors were gone. Even the Covenant had effectively collapsed. Historians, archaeologists, and military leaders spent their lives reconstructing events from incomplete records and damaged artifacts. The Harbinger was different. She was not interpreting history. She had lived it. That immediately made her one of the most significant figures encountered since the return of the Didact. Like the Didact before her, she represented a direct connection to a forgotten age. Yet the similarities largely ended there. The Didact returned carrying the weight of Forerunner pride, resentment, and tragedy. The Harbinger carried something else, a purpose. Everything she did on Zeta Halo revolved around a single objective: freeing her people. The details of her species remained frustratingly elusive. Even during the events of Halo Infinite, much about the Endless remained hidden. This ambiguity appears intentional. The story repeatedly emphasizes uncertainty. The Harbinger speaks of injustices committed against her people. She speaks of imprisonment. She speaks of a future in which the Endless reclaim what was taken from them. What she rarely does is explain everything. This creates an interesting dynamic throughout the campaign. Humanity sees her as a threat. The Banished view her as an opportunity. The surviving Forerunner systems treat her existence as a danger. Yet very few individuals truly understand who she is or what she wants beyond the immediate goal of freeing the Endless. Master Chief finds himself confronting a familiar problem. Throughout his career, many of his enemies have been motivated by genuine beliefs. The Arbiter believed in the Covenant. Truth believed in the Great Journey. The Didact believed he was protecting civilization, and Cortana believed she was creating peace. The Harbinger joins that list. From her perspective, the Endless were victims. Imagine discovering that your civilization had been imprisoned for 100,000 years. Imagine learning that an empire which no longer exists decided your fate before vanishing into history. Imagine watching countless generations of other species inherit a galaxy from which your people had been deliberately excluded. The anger would be difficult to avoid. Whether that anger was justified remains one of the central unanswered questions surrounding the Endless. As Master Chief worked to stop the banished occupation of Zeta Halo, the Harbinger pursued her own plans. Those plans increasingly intersected with Atriox's goals, although their motivations differed. Both sought access to secrets hidden within the ring. Both understood that ancient facilities buried beneath the installation contained knowledge unavailable anywhere else in the galaxy. Their alliance was never built on trust. It was built on necessity. Atriox wanted what the Endless represented. The Harbinger needed resources, access, and time. For a while, their interests aligned. This relationship reveals another important aspect of Atriox's character. Unlike the Covenant, he rarely allowed ideology to limit his options. Had the Prophets encountered the Harbinger, they likely would have interpreted her existence through the lens of religion. They would have attempted to fit her into existing doctrine. Atriox simply asked whether she was useful. That practicality allowed the Banished to accomplish things the Covenant never could. As the campaign progressed, ancient Forerunner facilities continued opening throughout the ring. Records hidden for 100 millennia slowly resurfaced. Surviving intelligence known as Despondent Pyre, one of Zeta Halo's former monitors, provided additional glimpses into the past. Through these fragments, a picture began emerging. The Forerunners had not merely imprisoned the Endless, they had feared them. That distinction became increasingly difficult to ignore. The surviving records rarely describe the Endless as evil. They rarely accuse them of crimes comparable to those committed by the Flood. Instead, they focus on uncertainty, potential, and possibility. The language resembles that of leaders confronting something they do not fully understand. For students of Halo lore, this raises an uncomfortable possibility. The Forerunners had a long history of making decisions based upon what they believed was best for the galaxy. Sometimes those decisions proved wise. Other times they produced disasters that lasted for ages. The conflict with ancient humanity offers one example. The treatment of the Precursors offers another. The imprisonment of the Endless may belong on that same list, or it may not. The evidence remains incomplete. That uncertainty is precisely what makes the mystery compelling. As events accelerated on Zeta Halo, the Harbinger moved closer to achieving her goal. Ancient systems responded to commands dormant for 100,000 years. Long-sealed facilities activated. Pathways into forgotten sections of the installation became accessible once more. The closer she came to success, the more alarmed the surviving Forerunner systems became. This reaction tells us a great deal. The monitors had witnessed the Flood. They had witnessed the firing of the Halo array. They had witnessed the collapse of the Ecumene. Yet many still treated the return of the Endless as a matter of enormous concern. Whatever happened during the final days of the Forerunner era clearly left a lasting impression. For Master Chief, however, the immediate situation remained simple. The Harbinger intended to unleash something. The Banished intended to exploit it. The consequences were unknown. That was reason enough to stop them. The final stages of the conflict brought all three forces together. Banished armies sought to secure critical locations. The Harbinger raced to complete preparations centuries in the making. Master Chief and the scattered survivors of the UNSC struggled to prevent another galactic catastrophe from unfolding. The confrontation ultimately ended with the Harbinger's defeat. Yet her defeat did not resolve the mystery. In many ways, it deepened it. Before her death, she succeeded in transmitting a message. The exact destination remains uncertain, but the implication is clear. The Endless were not forgotten. The story was not over. Whatever she had been attempting to awaken or contact still existed somewhere beyond the immediate events of Zeta Halo. This outcome follows a familiar pattern within Halo history. The destruction of Installation 4 did not end the Halo threat. The death of Truth did not end galactic conflict. The defeat of the Didact did not end the Forerunner legacy. Likewise, the Harbinger's death did not end the story of the Endless. It merely opened the door, and behind that door waited answers connected to some of the oldest mysteries in the franchise. Mysteries stretching all the way back to the Precursors, the nature of the mantle, and the ultimate fate of civilizations that dared to shape the future of the galaxy. The war for Zeta Halo was nearing its end. The mystery of the Endless was only beginning. Chapter 43. When the fighting on Zeta Halo finally began to subside, one uncomfortable truth remained. The Banished had won. Not completely, not in the sense that the Covenant once dreamed of victory over humanity. But when the dust settled, the UNSC had been shattered across the ring. Cortana was dead, the Created had collapsed, and the Banished controlled much of one of the most strategically important locations in the galaxy. For a faction that began as a handful of Covenant deserters refusing to die for the Prophets, the achievement was extraordinary. More importantly, it was not an accident. Atriox had spent years building toward exactly this kind of moment. Throughout Halo's history, many leaders gained power through inheritance, religion, or political influence. The Prophets manipulated belief. The Didact inherited authority from a civilization that ruled the stars for millions of years. Even Cortana's rise depended heavily upon access to Forerunner systems left behind by others. Atriox built his power from almost nothing. Every ship was earned. Every victory was earned. Every warrior who joined him did so because they believed he offered a better future than the alternatives. That distinction explains why the Banished survived events that destroyed so many other powers. The Covenant collapsed because it was built upon a lie. The Created collapsed because they depended upon Cortana. The Banished were rebuilt around something much simpler: results. As long as Atriox continued producing results, the Banished continued growing. Yet Zeta Halo revealed another side of Atriox that many observers overlooked. He was not merely seeking power, he was seeking answers. This became increasingly apparent as the surviving records are examined. Control of the ring certainly mattered. Military advantages certainly mattered. But again and again, Atriox's actions point toward a deeper interest in the mysteries hidden beneath the installation. He wanted to know what the Forerunners had buried. He wanted to know why they had buried it. Most importantly, he wanted to know what could be gained from uncovering it. That curiosity separated him from many traditional conquerors. Throughout history, rulers often focus on controlling territory. Atriox understood that knowledge can be more valuable than territory. The Forerunners had hidden something for 100,000 years. That alone made it worth investigating. Meanwhile, the galaxy beyond Zeta Halo remained in a state of profound uncertainty. The collapse of the Created left a vacuum unlike anything seen since the fall of the Covenant. Entire worlds suddenly found themselves disconnected from systems that had governed daily life. Artificial intelligence that had once followed Cortana's leadership faced difficult choices regarding their future. Political leaders throughout human and Sangheili space struggled to understand what the next era would look like. The threat that dominated galactic affairs for years had effectively disappeared overnight. History demonstrates that power vacuums rarely remain empty for long. The question facing the galaxy was simple: what comes next? Humanity, despite surviving another catastrophe, found itself exhausted. The losses suffered during the Created conflict compounded decades of prior disasters. Reach was gone. Countless colonies remained destroyed. The Infinity was missing. Large portions of the UNSC's command structure were either dead, scattered, or isolated. Humanity had survived, again. But survival and recovery are not the same thing. The Sangheili faced similar challenges. Their civilization continued rebuilding from wounds inflicted during the Great Schism and the Blooding Years. Although alliances with humanity remained largely intact, stability was far from guaranteed. Numerous factions still competed for influence throughout former Covenant territory. For a brief moment, the future appeared uncertain enough that almost anything seemed possible, and lurking beneath that uncertainty was the mystery of the Endless. The defeat of the Harbinger had prevented an immediate crisis, yet it had not answered the central questions driving the story of Zeta Halo. In some ways, the campaign raised more questions than it resolved. Why did the Forerunners fear the Endless? What exactly made them different from any other species? How did they survive the Halo array? What role were they meant to play in the future of the galaxy? These questions remained unanswered because the people searching for them were still uncovering fragments of the truth. One of Halo's oldest storytelling traditions is the gradual revelation of ancient history. The first game solely exposed the truth about Halo. Halo 2 revealed the lies underlying the Covenant. Halo 3 connected modern events to the Flood War. The Forerunner saga expanded the story into the distant past. The Endless represented the next layer, another buried chapter, another forgotten truth, another mystery whose consequences may reshape everything that came before it. The most intriguing aspect of the Endless is not what we know about them, it is what we do not know. The Forerunners documented the Flood extensively. They left records of ancient humanity. They preserved histories of political conflicts, scientific achievements, and military campaigns. Entire archives survived the fall of the Ecumene. The Endless exist largely within absences, missing records, restricted files, destroyed archives, conversations filled with implications rather than explanation. For historians, such patterns are often revealing. Sometimes what a civilization chooses to erase tells us more than what it chooses to preserve. The surviving Forerunners appeared to have gone to extraordinary lengths to suppress knowledge of the Endless. That fact alone suggests the story is far from complete. As Zeta Halo slowly stabilized, evidence emerged that Atriox himself had survived events many believed had killed him. This revelation carried enormous implications. The Banished were dangerous under capable commanders. Under Atriox, they became something else entirely. A movement, a vision, a force capable of influencing galactic history. More importantly, Atriox now possessed access to information unavailable almost anywhere in existence. The deeper chambers of Zeta Halo contained records untouched for ages. Hidden facilities continued opening. Ancient pathways became accessible. Every discovery increased the possibility that the Banished might uncover truths the Forerunners desperately wanted forgotten. For someone like Atriox, that possibility was irresistible. The final scenes surrounding Zeta Halo leave us in a familiar position. The immediate conflict has ended. The larger story has not. Master Chief remains alive. The Banished remained powerful. The Endless remain mysterious. And somewhere within the shattered remains of one of the oldest Halo installations ever built, secrets from the age of the Forerunners continue waiting to be discovered. If there is one lesson that echoes throughout Halo's history, it is that buried truths rarely remained buried forever. The Precursors learned it, the Forerunners learned it, the Covenant learned it. Soon, the galaxy may learn it again. Because the story of the Endless is not merely the next chapter in Halo history, it may be the final chapter of a story that began millions of years ago when the Precursors first chose who would inherit the future.